we're gathering here today before Chanukah in a time that isn't a simple time for Israel and for the Jewish people. And the goal of this session is really to, first of all, come together and learn together. Learning has always been in Jewish tradition something that gives people strength and inspiration, and especially chavruta learning, where we can feel, despite the distance, we can feel each other and how close we are in conversation. And we also want to show you some of the educational materials that you can also use with your students. We're going to be focusing on something very specific today, but on our website, there are many more resources for Chanukah as well that I'll give you a glimpse of. And of course, it's an opportunity for us to connect with each other as educators and share a little bit of our experience with our learners, and maybe share ideas and learn from others. So we're taking Chanukah as a case study for this question of celebrating in times of crisis. And I wanted to kind of just define the two questions that we're talking about. It's how to celebrate in times of crisis, but it's also why to celebrate. And even just in the beginning now of the session, when we ask each other, how is everyone doing? It's almost awkward to ask people these days, how are you doing? I'm okay. Well, none of us are really okay, but we can't constantly be in crisis mode, right? We need to also think about living our normal lives and doing what we're used to doing. It gives us also some strength. But then the question is, what about celebrating? Is that something that's appropriate or something that we want to do during times of crisis? And then the question is, how do we do that? And maybe also, why do we do that? So I don't know if any of you have seen this image. It's something that came out literally right after the events of the 7th of October. And what it says here in Hebrew is basically the 7th of October, in Hebrew, Shiv'a be'October. But you can also unmute yourself if you like. What is the word Shiv'a? That's kind of a little bigger here. What does that also mean? Where does that, what kind of connotation does that give you?
Well, if it wasn't with an ayin, it'd be like a shiva, like sitting shiva.
Right, like sitting Shiva. And so the fact that this happened on the 7th of October, in many ways, the word Shiva, which is kind of just a number, right, of the day of not even the Hebrew month, became this feeling that we're all sitting Shiva. And in Jewish tradition, and this is connected to what we're going to be talking about today, there's kind of a gradual process of how to deal with loss. And the Shiva is, I would say, the first stage, right? We have a certain crisis or a certain traumatic event, a loss of a loved one. And in this case, the feeling is that as a nation, we're all in mourning, and we've all lost someone or connected somehow. And in Jewish tradition, we have this idea of gradual dealing with this situation, where the first 7 days is the Shiva, and literally you don't do anything. You just sit in your home and people come and visit you, and you're very passive maybe. You're not really supposed to do anything. You're not really supposed to keep any of the mitzvot, or there's a lot of limitations on what you're supposed to do, because the idea is that you're focusing right now on your mourning. But then there's the next stage, which is the 30 days, or in Hebrew, the shloshim, where it gives you a month, like the next unit of time is a month, where there are certain things that you do start doing, but others that you still don't. And then there's a period of 11 months, which completes the mourning period. And then basically then you're supposed to go back to normal life. So before we start looking into some of the texts and sources that we're going to be learning together today, I want each one of you to think of these three pulses, or these three stages of dealing with a big crisis or a big loss. What would you write? And you can write this to yourself, and maybe we'll hear one or two responses, but what would you say is the appropriate thing to do or celebrate after 7 days, as opposed to after 30 days, as opposed to 11 months after the event? Meaning the feeling of, and I think maybe some of us have experienced this feeling that in the first few days we were all in shock and we couldn't do anything. But what were we capable of thinking of doing after a week, after the 30 days, which has already passed, and then looking forward to the 11-month point. So take a second to kind of write to yourselves these 3 milestones or these 3 points in time. What would be the right thing to be doing? And again, think of celebrations. Like for instance, I have a friend whose son had a bar mitzvah this past week, and all these dilemmas of like, is it appropriate to have a bar mitzvah, even though that's the date? But like, I know a lot of people who postponed in the first couple of weeks. They couldn't think of having something, an event of that kind. So take a moment to kind of think, and if anyone wants to share some thoughts on that, like what would feel appropriate or what would feel right in the different stages. Does anybody want to share some thoughts or an example of something that you wrote maybe for one of those points? Yeah, Nada.
Well, in our community, we had an interesting discussion about it because we were to celebrate our 20th anniversary in a week's time, and we had a discussion about it. And I had with my Dutch Limud group as well, where we, getting on with organizing it, and where we going to still celebrate this 20th anniversary. And we actually decided to do it because and do it, a little less low key, not as extended as we wanted to do it in the first place. But we decided to get on with things because we thought it was important to come together as Jews and still celebrate our moments that are important with us, and especially in this time, keeping to come together and learn from each other and support each other, and do it slightly different, but keep marking the important days. Still.
So I think what you mentioned is really important, meaning it's not only a way to celebrate something happy and to make you only just feel happy, but it's also a moment that we come together as a Jewish community. And
Yes.
So we don't want to let go of those moments where we can come together and mark the holidays or other milestones of our community because of the situation. And it's almost like, I think that's the big dilemma. We want to remain together, and we want to remain Jewish and celebrate our Judaism, but at the same time, we feel limited. We feel emotionally sometimes limited, that we don't feel like celebrating, and sometimes the limitations are more external, and that's what we're going to be talking about as well today. So I think I'm going to move on, and these are questions that we're also going to have time. You'll see, you'll also have time in breakout rooms to speak to each other a little bit more personally. But I want to move on to tell you a little bit also about the library. Some of you might be familiar with some of this, but I want to give you a little bit of background on how we're going to be learning the primary sources today and what we do at the National Library of Israel. I'll also share that we were also supposed to celebrate a very big milestone, and we moved into a beautiful new building. And like you said, we didn't celebrate it, but we did it. And we came together, and we did move into the new building. It just was very low key. It wasn't as festive and as public as we wanted it to be and how we planned it. But nonetheless, life goes on, and we moved into the new building. So that's another example of something that kind of happened, but not exactly in the way that we imagined. So just a few words about the National Library of Israel for those of you who might be less familiar. It is a library, and it has millions of books in it, but it also has many other items, and a lot of the things that we're going to see today and things that we use when we develop educational content are often actually not the books, but maps and audio files and personal archives and postcards and posters. Those are the kinds of things that we often incorporate in our educational materials that you'll get a taste of today. Just as an example, here are some things that you might find in our collections. This last item is a draft of Naftali Herz Imber's Hatikva. I'm saying it's a draft, it's in his handwriting, but it's not exactly the words that we say today. And yet he wrote this for someone who asked him to kind of jot it down for him when he was waiting for a doctor's appointment, actually in New York. We have photographs, Simchat Torah flags. We have teaching aids for Hebrew teachers from the 50s, posters. We have press, newspapers, letters, books, and more. So the main collections we hold in the library are obviously the two biggest collections are Judaism and Israel. We also have a very big music and audio collection, as well as one of the largest Islam and Middle East collections in the region, and also humanities collection that really supports the rest. You can find there, for instance, some Christian materials and other things about Israel that somehow connect to the rest of our collections. And what you're looking at now is the entrance to our new beautiful building. And the whole enterprise of moving to this beautiful new campus was really meant to make everything in the library more accessible to as many people as possible. So we collect and we preserve items. And at the end of this session, I'll show you that we have a new initiative to preserve things that are connected to the current situation in Israel, October 7th and the war and its aftermath, but also what's happening now in Jewish communities. So I'm already hinting to you that you'll get a link to see if you want to share anything that was created in your community or things that you want to write and share with the library, because that's our role, to preserve and also pass it on to the next generations. So what you're looking at on the right is an actual photograph from our new beautiful campus. And like I said, we not only are obligated to preserve treasures from the Jewish culture and from other cultures, but also make them accessible. And of course, it's a place for researchers and scholars, but we also see our role as a space for people to connect, like yourselves, and to create new knowledge. So I'm giving you a really just a taste of what the new building looks like. We have an education center, we have a youth library, we have a beautiful exhibit, and this is for if you or your students come visit in Israel, we are more than happy to meet you in person and give you a tour of the new building. There are beautiful exhibits. And in the meantime, all the resources that I'm in charge of developing as the manager of Global Jewish Education are online. All of these resources are online and they're free and they're open for your use. And what we try to do is we try to address in the content that we develop the skills of the future. So you can see that it's not only about literacy and about learning intellectually, but it's actually also about emotional intelligence and working together with your peers. And I hope that you see in the modeling we do today, how you can take our materials and use them to promote these skills with your learners as well. So why do we love working with primary sources and why do we think it's so important? You'll see soon that we're going to look at some authentic artifacts from the past. And we think it's very, very important, especially in our day and age of fake news, and no one really knows if something was authentic or maybe created by AI. We really want our students to get an authentic glimpse into the past, and we want them to ask questions about what they're looking at. And of course, we always want them also to connect and express themselves. So I'm going to do this very, very briefly, but this should be in your minds when you're learning from the source sheet that we're going to use together today. How do we look at a primary source in 4 very, very brief stages? So first, we just look. We see the item and we think of our first impression and what do we notice without knowing any of the context. But then the second stage is to start analyzing and understanding, where was this created? Who was it created for? And then we may be paying more attention to some of the details in this item. Later, we want to start connecting. Wait a second, what does this mean to me? How does this connect to my world? What do I find interesting about this item? And then in all of our activities, we always have a creative piece where students can add their own expression and their own creative product. So these are just a few things that you can do with primary sources. And I'll give you some examples. For instance, we use this, just recently was the Memorial Day for Yitzhak Rabin. We use this graffiti, this photograph, to create a discussion that's like a Talmud page. You can take a primary source, put it in the center of a room, and create a discussion around it where everyone can kind of weigh in. We'd like to show photos that really give people a glimpse into the more emotional layer of these historical moments, and not just to learn about them in a textbook. So this is the Orit, the Torah from the Jewish Ethiopian community, and they brought a copy to the library. We also think of critical skills of critical thinking, comparing different types of sources and their impact. So you see the same slogan here, Shalach et Ami, in a photograph of a rally and in a poster for a Soviet jury. We like to use different kinds of materials to show different kinds of impact. This is an ad from the 50s, a woman's dream to get a gas burner for her kitchen. We use these kinds of sources to do some reflective writing or creative writing. How does this make me feel? How would this be different if we created it today? This is from our collection of newspapers, and it's very interesting to see things that you might not appreciate in hindsight. We see that, for instance, the date of the Holocaust Remembrance Day was not officially decided, and there were different dates for a certain period of time. And just one example, we really recommend using our J-Press, our historical press collection. And of course, there are photographs of people and items that really can give us a glimpse into what people were experiencing in very dramatic moments of history. So now I want you to we're transitioning into the topic of our session today. I would like for you to scan this code. You can use your phone to scan it, or we're going to be putting another link in the chat. It's a Mentimeter, and it's pretty self-explanatory if you haven't used one. The question is, when you think of celebrating in times of crisis is, and I'm encouraging you to write, you can write up to 3 adjectives. It is, and then I don't want to give you the answers. I want everyone to really think about what they, how they would complete that sentence. And soon we're going to see a word cloud with everyone's answers. So take a moment to kind of just from your intuitively from your first thoughts, and you could write 3 different things. Maybe it's difficult, maybe it's important. I don't know. Those are just examples. So take a moment to log into this Mentimeter and just write 3 words or less that express your thoughts on celebrating in times of crisis. And I'm gonna soon share my screen so that you can see what everyone else is also writing. There are already some answers, but I'm going to give you a little bit more time just to make sure that everyone writes. Okay, so now you can see on my screen, you can see the different things that people have been writing, and while people continue to write, it changes. If for whoever's not familiar with this tool, on a Mentimeter, on a word cloud, if more than one person writes a certain word, then it will appear bigger. So if many people wrote the same thing, it'll appear bigger. But you can see actually, and it's really interesting, I don't know if this has ever happened to me on a Mentimeter, that all the words are the same size, which means that everyone wrote something different. So some people wrote that celebrating is in times of crisis is emotional, it's a struggle, it's a challenge, it needs courage. So it's not so simple. Some people wrote it's a mechaya, it's normalcy, it's authentic, and it's necessary. It's a mitzvah even, some people wrote. And celebrating in times of crisis is hope. And so you can see that there's a range of feelings that come up when we think of this question of celebrating in times of crisis. It's definitely a very complex issue. It's not so simple for us to say, yeah, we're celebrating and that's it. Like it comes with a struggle, but it also comes with a lot of, I would say, a lot of weight but it's important, even though it's challenging. Maybe it's something that we should do. Someone wrote that it's forced. Maybe we kind of have to force ourselves to celebrate, even when it's a little difficult for us. And what I would like to do now, we're going to soon go into breakout rooms, and you'll have a chance to learn together a few texts that deal with the question of specifically of Chanukah and how we can celebrate Chanukah during times of crisis. And what's interesting is that on Chanukah specifically, what comes up is the question of the Chanukah. So the Chanukah is supposed to be something public. And if there's someone who wants to read, you don't have to read the Hebrew, but if someone wants to read the English out loud, that would be great. Do we have a volunteer?
Sure, I read. Oh, someone else. Yeah, go for it.
Sophie, I think you could read, Sophie.
Okay. Kids social general. It is a mitzvah to light the Chanukah in the doorway that opens the street in order to publicize the miracle. And it was done in this manner in the days of the Mishnah and the Talmud. Now, since we live amongst non-Jews, we light the Chanukah in the house. And if you have a window facing the street, you should light it there. If not, you should light it near the door.
Okay, so let's talk a second about this text. This kind of gives us in a nutshell what the Chanukah is all about. It's and in Hebrew you can see the term Pirsume Nisa, which is the halachic term for the fact that we're supposed to publicize the miracle. So let's talk about this for a moment. You're supposed to put it outdoors or outside to publicize the miracle, but in reality, it's not always so possible to do that. So we were just talking about this in the beginning of the session, that many people today are experiencing this feeling that maybe it's not the right time to kind of expose their Jewish identity or to publicize it. And I'd love for people to share a little bit of thoughts on this question of, is this a time where people should be hiding their Chanukiot and just lighting them indoors? Or is this a time to put your Chanukiah on your windowsill and show it to the world? So we'd love to hear a couple of people maybe sharing some thoughts on that.
I mean, I would say that it depends on context. Like if someone genuinely feels threatened, that's what the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is drawing attention to. Like preservation of self and safety is a paramount value. So if you feel threatened and may invite violence towards yourself or to your home because of your outward expression of your Judaism, then take appropriate measures. At the same time, certainly in the community where I live, if something like that, if I'm feeling something like that, that's an indication of a deeper issue at play in the systems or the social systems of which I'm a part. So if anything, it should inspire me to become more aware and active in what's going on socially in my community, to know, what steps are being taken by local government or state government, whatever it may be, to prevent such things from happening. So while it's an inward, it's an inward safety thing, it's also, we can't just sit back and let that become the norm.
Right. So that's one of these dilemmas where, like you said, we don't want to put ourselves in danger, but at the same time, we have the right to express our Judaism also in the public domain. Or do we have protection? Is this the smart thing to do these days? And I'm going to leave some of these questions open because it's going to be part of the conversations that you're going to have in the breakout rooms in a couple of minutes. What I just want to show you, and thank you, Baruch, for sharing. I want to show you that we're going to be looking at a few primary sources together. They are on this presentation, which in a moment I will show you where you can access. But we've also created a Padlet for you to use. So whatever's more comfortable for you. And there's also a source sheet that's a PDF that you can open on another browser, like on another tab on your browser, so that you can decide how to look at these. But we're basically going to look at 4 primary sources. These are 2 images from Germany and from France of basically families lighting candles in their homes. So that kind of also demonstrates what the Shulchan Aruch is talking about. And we have a very interesting picture of kids in 1947 during the Yom HaAtzmaut, during the War of Independence, lighting candles. Actually, you can see outside, and they aren't in harm's way. I could tell you from the article that's connected to this photograph. But there's a message here why they're lighting their candles outside during the war. And this might be a familiar image to some of you who might be familiar with Chabad Chanukiot, where we see this not only in Israel at all, we see this in many places in the world, where it's very acceptable for there to be a huge Chanukiah, not just a small private home Chanukiah, but a very big public Chanukiah lit in the public sphere. And those are the 4 primary sources that we're going to kind of focus on during this time now in the breakout rooms. What I want to show you is that we've created a Padlet that we're also sharing now in the chat. In this Padlet, you have all of these resources in one frame, so it might make it easier for you. And here's that link to the Mentimeter that we were doing before. And there's a link to the source sheet here. In this Padlet, there are also many other resources that we wanted to share with you, and some of them we're going to go over a little bit later. But what I don't want to waste the time for you to have your chavruta in the breakout room. So we'll be going into breakout rooms now in, I would say, groups of 3. And we're going to encourage you to learn about these primary sources. And there's some questions there. There's a worksheet that's actually built for students, but there are also some really interesting discussion questions that you can look at together and discuss together in the breakout room. And then you'll see there are also other sources that you might have time to look at. We're encouraging you to, first of all, introduce each other a little bit, say, a little bit more about who you are and where you're coming from, and then learn a little bit together. But don't forget, in your, I would say you have at least 10 or maybe even 15 minutes in the breakout room to also think about your students or your learners that you're working with. How would this resonate with them? Or what would you focus on in teaching them about this topic? What might be sensitive or what might be interesting to them, etc. Welcome back, everybody. I hope they had enough time to start looking at some of the sources and talk. So let's start with you. Share some thoughts or some things that came up, maybe some questions that you focused on, or thoughts you had about your students tackling some of these sources. Who wants to start?
So I can share. I was with Shalva, and first we spoke a little bit about the situation, and we love the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. By the way, in Hebrew it's really hard to read, no? It's in Aramaic, so it was really hard. And also we spoke about the picture that the children lit the Chanukah in Tel Aviv, because we feel it's like our second independent world. So I think we can share this the photo at school and talk about it with our kids.
Because what was the explanation? Like, why did you think they were lighting the candles outdoors? Like,
yeah, to show everyone that they celebrate.
Right. There's an element there of like actually showing resilience and doing it publicly. The children, it was part of, there was a message there that the message was, these kids weren't in danger. They were in Tel Aviv where there was no fighting. They're right there. So that's important to just understand the context. If you use this with students, they weren't in harm's way. But this idea of we are continuing not only to get by, but to actually celebrate our holidays, and we're not ashamed of it, and we're celebrating our our holidays just as we would. Okay, more thoughts maybe, or things that came up in other groups maybe? Yeah.
For me, we discussed in them, and for our group, we discussed about safety versus performing it in public. And in different places, safety is not that of legitimate things, unfortunately. And we looked later on the Lubavitch letter, which is a great letter because it's talk about freedom of practicing things in a time of sometimes tyranny. And that's something that concern my student, at least, you know, their safety. And they talk about it a lot in class. And, you know, not even them, also our staff is talking about that, you know, going in a public bus, taking symbols of Judaism. Some people think that we still need to show it. Some other people think we need to hide it. So it's a whole, it's a lot of challenging questions, you know, this debate between safe and unsafe, and you know, the need to continue. So a lot of those, many of the photos were very interesting and contributed a lot of the discussion. Like, I don't know, what is your name? You spoke before me. What is your name?
Yael.
Oh, Yael. About those kids, it's amazing how they continue to celebrate life and celebrate Judaism, even though it was dangerous to be at the time outside. And all those amazing, you know, Chanukah that Chabad spread all over the world. And it's a good thing, but it's a concern for all of us right now.
For sure. So I think you also mentioned
talk about it.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Lubavitcher's letter, and I think it's remarkable that the reason he thinks that he gives for showing the Chanukah is actually not even about Judaism. It's about universal values of freedom and of bringing light and openness to the world. And so it's almost like the Chanukah isn't even a Jewish symbol, or not only a Jewish symbol, it's also a universal symbol of being able to be free and celebrate your culture, whatever that may be. So I think that's also an interesting layer to that text, which is, again, what we talked about before. You see these authentic documents, like if we hadn't shown this letter, like who would have thought like that's what the message of the Lubavitcher Rebbe would be? But here, this is what he wrote, and there's a value there on how Jews can live in a community and show their Judaism, but at the same time live universal values. Yes, Ornit.
I almost feel like we need a campaign to light candles all over the world and have people joining us just for those universal, you know, ideas, you know, not just being Jewish, but bringing everybody, and, you know, instead of going into dark time, into the light.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what Hanukkah is about, actually, in many different layers of this holiday. It's not a coincidence that also in Christmas, at the same time of year, we see similar motifs of light in the darkness, and this feeling in the winter that we need to show the evergreen tree, how, you know, the life continues. So there's a lot to say about how we can find things in common with the other cultures that we live in, and I think that's a really important message too, of a lot of strength and inspiration. It makes me feel that we're all in this together and that we can also overcome. So thank you for everything you're doing, and we'll be in touch. Besorot tovot.
Thank you, Shuvi.
תודה רבה.
ביי.
תודה רבה.
נתראה מחר, ביי.
Okay, so see you tomorrow, I guess. And the recording,
Wait.
and it'll
Stop recording.